The world exploded in a kaleidoscope of shrapnel and searing heat. One moment, Lieutenant Elijah Vance was carving a confident arc through the frigid European sky. The roar of his P-51 Mustang, Spirit of Selma, a familiar symphony in his ears. The next, a jagged, malevolent fist slammed into his starboard wing, tearing through metal and history with casual disdain. Eli's stomach lurched as the controls went slack, the stick suddenly less a rudder and more a dead weight in his gloved hand. A guttural cough ripped through the engine, followed by a shuddering groan that vibrated through the very bones of his aircraft. Smoke, acrid and black, belched from the wing root, painting an obscene smear across the pristine canvas of the sky. "Damn it!" Eli's voice was a ragged whisper, lost beneath the dying shriek of his Allison engine. He wrestled the stick, stomped the rudder pedals, but the Mustang, once an extension of his will, now bucked and veered like a dying beast. German 109s, silver-bellied specters, were already peeling away, their pilots confident of their kill. They'd been ambushed, a pack of wolves materializing from the sun, and Eli, flying point on a reconnaissance run too deep over the Rhineland, had been the unlucky prey. Altitude bled away, the altimeter needle spinning backward like a desperate gambler's wheel. Below, the dark, snow-dusted forests of Germany stretched endlessly, a hostile, unforgiving carpet. Bailing out was an option, a quick descent into the unknown, a lottery ticket between capture and a frozen death. But the thought of leaving Selma, his beautiful, temperamental bird, named for the defiant spirit of his people back home, tore at him. She was more than metal. She was a promise, a symbol, a testament. He wouldn't abandon her. Not yet. With a grin set to his jaw, Eli fought the dying plane. The controls were mushy, the starboard wing a fractured ruin, but he coaxed her into a long, desperate glide. The smoke intensified, stinging his eyes, and the cockpit filled with the metallic tang of burning oil. He could hear the whistle of wind through new holes in the fuselage, a mournful dirge. Find a clearing. Any clearing. He focused on the blur of trees below, his mind a steel trap of calculations, glide ratio, wind shear, potential impact zones. His body was tense, adrenaline singing in his veins, but his Tuskegee training, forged in the fires of expectation and prejudice, held firm. He was a black man in a white man's war, flying against an enemy that deemed him less than human. Failure was not an option. Surrender was unthinkable. The forest seemed to rise to meet them, an undulating sea of dark green and white. He spotted it then, a narrow, snow-covered lane, perhaps a logging trail, threading through the dense pines. Too short, too narrow, but it was something. With a prayer on his lips and the ghosts of his ancestors whispering courage in his ears, Eli braced himself. The impact was bone-jarring, a cacophony of screeching metal, splintering wood, and grinding earth. The Mustang slammed down, plowing through the snow, shedding parts of itself like a bird molting in a gale. The cockpit canopy shattered inward, showering Eli with shards of plexiglass. His head slammed against the instrument panel with sickening force, a blinding flash of white light, then darkness. Consciousness returned in ragged bursts, heralded by a dull, throbbing pain in his skull. The smell of aviation fuel was overwhelming, thick and cloying, a suffocating perfume of danger. Eli groaned, his vision swimming. He was upside down, trapped. A groan escaped his lips, a sound of profound disorientation. He pushed, he strained, his limbs screaming protests. The cockpit was a twisted mess of wires and fractured metal. "Eli, pull yourself together," he muttered, his voice hoarse, his tongue thick in his mouth. He unlatched his harness with fumbling fingers, the familiar click a small victory. Gravity reasserted itself, sending him tumbling out of the pilot's seat and onto the torn fabric of the ceiling. He lay there, gasping, the world spinning. Blood dripped into his left eye, warm and viscous. He touched his forehead, his fingers coming away crimson. A gash, deep but not catastrophic. A sharp pain lanced through his left ankle when he tried to move it. Twisted, maybe broken. He had to get out. The fuel. The plane could ignite any second. He crawled through the wreckage, scraping himself raw, until he found a jagged opening where the canopy had been. He pushed himself through, gulping down the freezing air, which, despite the gasoline fumes, tasted like salvation. He collapsed into the snow beside his ruined aircraft, shivering, his body radiating a cold sweat. The spirit of Selma lay broken, a testament to the savagery of war. Her fuselage was rent, her wings mangled. She was silent now, a monument to a dream momentarily deferred. Eli closed his eyes, a wave of profound sorrow washing over him. Then fear cut through the grief. He was deep behind enemy lines, injured, exposed. He forced himself to move, pushing through the searing pain in his ankle. Every step was a fresh agony, a betrayal from his own body. He stumbled away from the wreckage, knowing the Germans would be searching. He needed cover, a place to hide, to plan. The forest was a dark, oppressive presence, the silence profound, broken only by the crunch of his boots in the snow and the ragged rhythm of his own breathing. He kept moving, favoring his good leg, his gaze darting between the trees, every snap of a twig, every rustle, a potential enemy. Hours blurred into an eternity of pain and paranoia. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful, deceptive backdrop to his terrifying reality. Just as twilight began to deepen, filtering the forest into an impenetrable gloom, Eli caught sight of something unnatural through the trees. A break in the dense canopy, too regular to be natural. He pushed forward, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Then he saw it. A clearing far larger than any logging path, and in its center, a stretch of cracked, overgrown asphalt. An auxiliary airfield. Abandoned, it seemed, its perimeter fence rusted and broken, weeds pushing through the concrete. A derelict wooden control tower leaned precariously, like a broken tooth. Relief, sharp and sudden, warred with an even deeper dread. An airfield, even an abandoned one, meant proximity to something, someone. But as he scanned the desolate scene, a shock of disbelief, then a sickening surge of recognition, froze him in his tracks. Nestled near a dilapidated hangar, partially obscured by shadow and the skeletal branches of a winter-bare oak, stood a German fighter plane, a Messerschmitt Bf 109G. Its distinctive angular silhouette was unmistakable. Its paint scheme, a mottled gray-green dull in the fading light. But what truly stole his breath, what made his injured heart hammer like a trapped bird against his ribs, was the sight of two ground crew figures, gone. But the fuel bowser was still beside it, its hose coiled neatly, disconnected. The canopy was open, a dark maw. It was fueled, ready to fly. Eli stared, his mind reeling. A pristine enemy fighter, abandoned, fueled, far behind enemy lines. It was a phantom, an impossible mirage born of his delirium. But it was real, and in that moment, as the icy wind bit at his exposed skin and the certainty of capture weighed heavy as lead in his gut, an unthinkable, treasonous thought bloomed in the dark corners of his mind. A Messerschmitt, his enemy, a symbol of everything he fought against, but also a way out, a desperate, unthinkable act of defiance. He took another agonizing step forward, his eyes locked on the sleek, dangerous silhouette. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, and the choice before him, repugnant and seductive, stretched out into the encroaching night. He was Lieutenant Elijah Vance, a Tuskegee Airman, and this was an enemy machine. Yet, a spark, hot and rebellious, ignited in his soul. He looked from his mangled uniform, ripped and stained, to the German plane, then back to his bloodied hands. With a final, excruciating grunt, he started to hobble towards it. Every fiber of his being screamed, "No." But his survival instinct, primal and absolute, roared, "Yes." The wind, a banshee wailing across the desolate airfield, clawed at Eli's tattered uniform, whipping his bloodied hair into his eyes. His gaze remained fixed on the Messerschmitt, its silhouette a stark, predatory cutout against the bruised canvas of the dusk sky. Every instinct, forged in the discipline of Tuskegee and the fierce pride of his squadron, screamed at guttural refusal. This was the enemy. This was the steel bird that had harried his comrades, that had torn holes in the very fabric of his world. But survival, a more ancient, brutal commander, roared louder. He stumbled closer, each step an agony that sent shards of pain through his ribs. The cold metal of the fuselage, a stark contrast to the icy air, felt alien beneath his trembling fingers. He dragged himself onto the wing, a feat of sheer willpower, his teeth gritted against a whimper. The cockpit gaped, dark and inviting, like a predator's maw. He hoisted himself in, the unfamiliar controls pressing against his wounded side. His fingers, calloused from countless hours in the cockpit of a P-51 Mustang, hesitated before the throttle, the stick, the array of German gauges that might as well have been hieroglyphs. A wave of nausea, both from his injuries and the sheer audacity of his act, threatened to consume him. He was Elijah Vance, Lieutenant U.S. Army Air Corps, and he was about to steal the devil's wings. His pilot's instincts, honed to a razor's edge, quickly took over the trembling. He ran his hands over the controls, familiarizing himself with the layout, discerning the function of each lever and dial through touch and logic. Fuel gauge, oil pressure, propeller pitch. The mechanics of flight were universal, even if the labels were not. The engine, a Daimler-Benz DB605, felt powerful, coiled and waiting. He opened the cowling, his expert eye scanning the intricate network of pipes and wires. No obvious sabotage, no signs of damage. The ground crew, in their haste, had left it pristine, a testament to German engineering and their own panicked retreat. His gaze swept the empty airfield, then narrowed. The fuel bowser remained, its hose disconnected but still within reach. And nearby, barely visible in the deepening gloom, was a small, canvas-covered structure, a makeshift supply tent. If he was to survive, truly survive, he needed more than just a stolen plane. He needed to disappear. The next few hours were a brutal, silent battle against his own broken body. He hobbled to the tent, finding it hastily abandoned. Inside, among scattered uniforms and discarded rations, he found what he desperately needed. A jerry can of fuel, a few basic tools, wrenches, pliers, wire cutters, and impossibly several cans of industrial-grade matte black paint, likely for painting vehicles or camouflaging fixed positions, and brushes. An unholy idea, cold and brilliant, bloomed in his mind. Back at the BF-109, working in the dim, ethereal glow of a single scavenged flashlight, Eli went to work. Each movement was a calculated agony. First, he stripped the German markings, the swastika on the tail, the Balkenkreuz on the wings, symbols of an ideology he abhorred. With a flathead screwdriver and sheer stubborn force, he pried them off, leaving ghost outlines that still burned like brand marks. Then, with a can of paint thinner he'd found, he meticulously scrubbed away any remaining insignia, erasing the plane's identity with grim determination. Then came the paint. He started with the belly, then the wings, then the fuselage, moving with methodical precision despite the tremors in his hands and the agony in his side. The thick, obsidian black coated the sleek curves of the fighter, swallowing the dull gray-green of its original camouflage. It was a slow, agonizing process, each stroke a defiant act of transformation. The plane, once a symbol of the Third Reich, was becoming something else entirely. A shadow, a phantom. By the time the last streak of black was applied, and the drying paint settled into an unsettling, featureless void, the moon hung high, a pale observer in a star-dusted sky. Eli slumped against the wheel, exhausted, covered in sweat, dirt, and paint. The plane looked alien, menacing. Stripped of identity, it was a terrifying blank slate. He had turned a weapon of the enemy into what? A weapon of his own design. He climbed back into the cockpit, the air thick with the smell of fresh paint and his own raw sweat. The weight of what he was about to do settled heavy in his gut. His hands trembled on the stick. He was a Tuskegee Airman. His brothers flew red-tailed P-51s, protecting bombers, fighting for freedom. He was about to fly a black, German BF-109, alone, into the night, against an unknown enemy. What would they call him? A traitor? A madman? He no longer knew, but his people were dying. His country was at war, and he was alive. With a deep, rattling breath, he started the engine. The powerful roar of the Daimler-Benz vibrated through the airframe, a deep, resonant growl that was both exhilarating and terrifying. He taxied down the makeshift runway, his vision blurred, his focus absolute. Takeoff was a controlled explosion of power. The black specter clawed its way into the night sky, silent and deadly. Eli felt a surge of adrenaline, potent enough to dull the constant ache in his ribs. He banked sharply, feeling the unfamiliar yet responsive controls. This wasn't a Mustang, but it was a fighter, and he was a pilot. He knew this language. For an hour, he flew west, deeper into German-held territory, a ghost searching for a target. The world below was a patchwork of darkened fields and flickering village lights. Then he saw it. A thread of headlights, snaking along a deserted road. A German supply convoy. Slow, lumbering, vulnerable. His heart hammered. This was it. The moment of truth. He descended, quiet as a hawk, using the darkness as his cloak. He came in low, fast, the black plane an invisible arrow through the night. The convoy appeared unaware, rumbling along, its drivers oblivious. He targeted the lead truck, not for destruction, but for terror. He opened fire, the cannon shells ripping into the ground just ahead of the vehicle, kicking up geysers of dirt and sparks. The effect was instantaneous and chaotic. Headlights swiveled wildly, brakes screeched, drivers cursed. He made another pass, strafing the road behind the convoy, purposefully missing the trucks themselves, but showering them with dirt and the shriek of near misses. A few scattered rifle shots rose tentatively towards him, useless against his speed and the cloak of darkness. Panic erupted. Men scrambled from trucks, shouting, looking not up, but around them, searching for an unseen attacker on the ground. Then, Eli heard it over his radio, a crackle of German voices, distorted by distance and fear.
Was war das? Ein Saboteur.
What was that? A saboteur.
Ein Phantom. Es ist schwarz. Kein Kennzeichen.
A phantom. It's black. No insignia.
Hat das unsere Luftwaffe geschickt?
Did our own Air Force send that? Their confusion was his victory. He hadn't just attacked them. He had broken their sense of security. He had introduced an unknown variable. A specter. He peeled away, climbing rapidly back into the night, leaving behind a scene of utter pandemonium. The lights of the convoy extinguished, leaving only the sporadic flashes of panicked rifle fire. As he leveled off, the adrenaline slowly receded, replaced by a cold, unsettling calm. He had done it. He had flown an enemy plane, attacked the enemy, and gotten away with it. But what had he become? He looked down at his hands, still trembling slightly, coated in a fine layer of black paint. The uniform beneath was stained, ripped. He was no longer Lieutenant Elijah Vance, Tuskegee Airman, flying for the Red Tails. He was a shadow, a ghost, a black menace in the German sky. And the thought, terrifying in its implication, settled deep in his soul. He was utterly, completely alone in this new war. And something, somewhere, was already waiting for him to make his next move. The air was a frigid, inky canvas, stitched with the distant, indifferent glitter of stars. Below, Europe slept or tried to under the oppressive blanket of war. Eli Vance, or what was left of him, felt neither cold nor the need for sleep. He was a creature of the night now, perfectly adapted, perfectly lethal. His Messerschmitt Bf 109, stripped of its markings and painted a matte, light-absorbing black, was less a plane and more a hunting implement. Its engine, expertly tuned, hummed with a low, predatory growl, a sound he had learned to interpret like a second heartbeat. 2 weeks had passed since his first chaotic foray, 2 weeks of relentless, systematic terror. His prey, German supply trains, always under the cloak of deepest night, always far from established airfields, always swift and brutal. Tonight, his target was a stretch of rail line snaking through the desolate forests south of Nancy. He'd tracked this particular convoy for hours, a serpentine beast hauling fuel and ammunition eastward, toward the crumbling German front. His intelligence wasn't from Allied high command. It was from a tattered German supply schedule he'd pilfered from a downed reconnaissance pilot, supplemented by his own uncanny knack for pattern recognition. He descended, a silent peregrine falcon plunging from the heavens. The train, a string of dull metallic boxes, chuffed along, oblivious. Below him, the forest canopy was a vast, dark quilt. No moon, just the faint shimmer of distant cloud cover. Perfect. Eli pushed the stick, sending the Messerschmitt into a steep dive. The wind shrieked against the canopy, a banshee's cry that was music to his ears. His vision, honed by countless hours in the dark, picked out the weak points. The locomotive's tender, the tanker cars, the exposed flatbeds piled high with munitions. He didn't aim for the men. Not yet. He aimed for the machines that fed the war. His finger tightened on the trigger. A burst of 20mm cannon fire erupted from the wings, tracers arcing downward, cutting through the night like incandescent claws. The first shells tore into the tender car, showering sparks and steam. The locomotive bucked, a dying leviathan. He pulled up, circled, and descended again. This time, he raked the length of the ammunition cars. The explosions were not instantaneous, but a slow, horrifying crescendo. First a small pop, then a larger thud, then a chain reaction, each blast feeding the next. The night was momentarily ripped open by an inferno of orange and red, throwing grotesque shadows of trees and wreckage across the landscape. Pieces of metal, timber, and unknown contents rained down around him, a violent, metallic hail. He flew through the blossoming inferno, feeling the heat buffet his plane, tasting the acrid smoke. He wasn't just destroying the train, he was leaving a psychological scar. A black, unmarked plane, striking from nowhere, disappearing into nothing, leaving behind only fire and chaos. His radio crackled to life, picking up panicked German transmissions from the nearest forward observation post. Gott's Willen, der Schwarzschatten.
Ist wieder da.
God's will, the Black Shadow. He's here again.
Verdammt. Ein Geisterflugzeug. Es gibt keine Identifikation.
Damned. A ghost plane. There's no identification.
Die Lieferungen alles verloren. Wir sind verwundbar.
The supplies all lost. We are vulnerable. Eli banked sharply, climbing back into the comforting embrace of the high altitude. The fire below dwindled to a distant, angry glow, a beacon of his dark work. He felt no elation, no triumph, only a cold satisfaction. It was efficient. It was necessary. Each destroyed train, each disrupted supply line, was a small but definite wrench in the gears of the Third Reich. He was a cancer in their logistics, slowly, meticulously metastasizing. Back in his stolen hangar, nestled deep within a forgotten French farm, the silence was almost deafening after the roar of the engines and the scream of destruction. He meticulously cleaned his plane, checking for damage, reloading the ammunition belts. Each action was precise, devoid of emotion. He was a mechanic, a pilot, a killer. The man Elijah Vance was slowly dissolving, replaced by the Black Baron. He caught his reflection in the polished surface of the propeller, a gaunt, dark-eyed stranger. Was this transformation worth it? He didn't ask anymore. The question had become irrelevant. His war wasn't about victory parades or medals. It was about the methodical dismantling of an enemy that had stolen everything from him. And in the process, he was stealing pieces of himself. Hundreds of miles away, in a dimly lit, smoke-filled room in Whitehall, Squadron Leader Alistair Finch tapped a pencil impatiently against a stack of decoded German intercepts. His small team of intelligence analysts was hunched over their desks, poring over the latest batch of frantic enemy communications. Another one, Finch, mumbled a junior officer, Lieutenant Davies, pushing a deciphered message across the table. German 8th Army reports a catastrophic loss of a fuel and munitions train near Nancy. Citing unknown aerial aggressor, black, no markings. Sounds like a broken record. Finch sighed, rubbing his temples. Unknown aerial aggressor. Der Schwarzschatten.
Das Geisterflugzeug.
It's all the same nonsense, Davies. We've been getting these reports for weeks now. Every time a German supply convoy gets hit, they invent some mythical bogeyman. But, sir, Davies pressed, the sheer volume, and the consistency. These aren't isolated incidents. They're systematic, almost surgical in their precision. Finch snorted. Precisely why it's propaganda, Lieutenant. Or perhaps internecine sabotage. High-ranking Nazi officials cutting each other's throats for resources. God knows they're a paranoid, backstabbing lot. Imagine the Führer's reaction if one of his generals reported losing vital supplies to a rogue, unidentified aircraft every other night. No, far easier to invent a black shadow for the troops, a scapegoat for their own incompetence or corruption. Another analyst, a severe woman named Miss Thorne, looked up from her work. Sir, the tone of these intercepts, it's not typical German propaganda. It's raw panic, fear. The men on the ground truly believe there's something out there. And the damage reports, they're consistent with high-caliber aerial cannon fire. And whose aircraft would that be, Thorne? Finch challenged, gesturing around the room. The Luftwaffe's? They'd know their own. Ours? We'd certainly know if we had a rogue pilot operating a black, unmarked Messerschmitt behind enemy lines, wouldn't we? He scoffed, dismissing the notion entirely. Impossible. We account for every plane, every pilot. Davies frowned, picking up another report. Unless it's a new German experimental prototype gone rogue, testing an advanced stealth airframe. Then why wouldn't they shoot it down? Finch countered. No, this is a distraction. A deliberate attempt to sow confusion among their own ranks, or perhaps to test our reaction. Mark it down as possible German internal sabotage, amplified by propaganda objectives. And for God's sake, stop wasting valuable analytical time on these ghost stories. He swept his hand across the table, dismissing the pile of intercepts. Focus on credible threats, the U-boat movements, the V-rocket intelligence. These Black Baron fairy tales can wait. As Finch turned back to his own reports, he failed to notice the subtle tremor in Miss Thorne's hand as she reread a specific detail from an earlier intercept. A German soldier's panicked, almost whispered account of seeing the pilot briefly in the firelight.
Ein schwarzer Mann wie der Teufel selbst, aber kein Deutscher.
A black man, like the devil himself, but not German. Her brow furrowed. A black man? In a Messerschmitt? The thought was ludicrous, yet it snagged in her mind, a dissonant chord in the cacophony of war. Finch was right. It was impossible. But in this war, the impossible had a nasty habit of becoming devastatingly real. Meanwhile, Eli, far above the English Channel, was already lining up his next target. A westbound troop transport. No supplies this time, just bodies. The rules of engagement had blurred, then shattered, replaced by a singular, burning imperative. The darkness was his sanctuary, the engine's roar his only companion, and the destruction he wrought, his only purpose. But even in his cold, isolated resolve, a new, unforeseen threat was slowly converging. From the east, a German squadron, frustrated by the relentless attacks, had begun nocturnal patrols over known supply routes. And from the west, a flicker of suspicion, a tiny ember of doubt, had just been ignited in the sharp mind of Miss Thorne. The Black Baron was no longer an invisible entity. He was being hunted. The air in the collapsed wine cellar clung heavy and damp, redolent with the ghosts of fermented grapes and the acrid tang of aviation fuel. Eli moved like a wraith through the gloom, his face smeared with grease and exhaustion, the flickering lantern casting grotesque shadows that danced like his own tortured thoughts. The Messerschmitt, his only companion and his terrible burden, lay splayed across ancient flagstones, its engine cowling peeled back like an open wound. He was trying to graft a new life onto its ravaged heart, a patch of scavenged metal here, a frayed wire spliced with bare, trembling fingers there. Weeks had bled into an indistinguishable morass since the troop transport. He'd seen them, the young faces, bundled against the cold, laughing, joking, unaware. And then the fire, the explosion, the screams. He told himself it was war, that they were the enemy, that the cost justified the means. But the faces haunted his dreams, merging with others, older ones, remembered ones, innocent ones. Each successful strike, each plume of smoke on the horizon, was a temporary bomb that curdled into a fresh dose of poison the moment he was alone again. His resources were dwindling. Fuel, siphoned from abandoned trucks and farm machinery under the cloak of night, was nearly gone. Ammunition, salvaged from downed planes, both Allied and Axis, was a dangerous lottery. He was out of the specialized hydraulic fluid vital for the Messerschmitt's landing gear. Without it, every landing was a dice roll against structural collapse. He tried to improvise using crude engine oil, but the system had protested, groaning under the strain. He ran a hand over the scarred metal of the fuselage, a low, guttural sound escaping his lips. Almost there, he whispered, not to the plane, but to the ghosts that crowded his peripheral vision. A worn photograph, tucked into a hidden pouch on his flight suit, was his last tether to sanity. A woman with kind eyes, a young boy with his mischievous grin, his son, his wife, gone, the fuel for his vengeance. He pressed the photo to his lips, the paper soft against his chapped skin. Soon, he vowed, soon, the Black Baron will silence them all. But even the defiance in his voice was thinning, eroded by the relentless solitude, the cold, unforgiving reality of his impossible war. He was less barren, more phantom, slowly dissolving into the darkness he embraced. In the austere, high-ceilinged war room of the Luftwaffe High Command in Berlin, the air was thick with frustrated fury. General Kessler, a man whose face seemed perpetually etched in a scowl, slammed a meaty fist onto the polished oak table. Another supply convoy lost. Another squadron, diverted, returning with no contact. Ghosts, they say. Are we fighting phantoms, or are our pilots simply cowards? A new voice, calm and precise, cut through the bluster. Neither, General. Oberst Schmidt stepped forward, his uniform immaculate, his movements economical, his eyes like chips of flint that missed nothing. Schmidt was not built for bluster or sentiment. He was a scalpel designed for precise, painful extraction. We are fighting an anomaly, and anomalies have weaknesses. Schmidt was a legend in Luftwaffe counterintelligence, famous for dismantling resistance networks with dispassionate efficiency. He carried no medals for bravery, only a reputation for absolute ruthlessness and an unparalleled ability to perceive the patterns others missed. Reports of Der Schwarzbären are spreading amongst the ranks, General. Superstition is a contagion. We must amputate it. He laid out a series of large-scale maps, marked with precise coordinates and timestamps. The attacks are targeted. Supply lines, fuel depots, troop transports, not random acts of terror, but strategic blows against our logistics. He tapped a cluster of markers. Always at night, always a single aircraft, always a Messerschmitt Bf 109, yet our records show no such losses in the regions reported. His gaze swept the assembled officers. This is not a ghost, gentlemen. This is a pilot, highly skilled, operating clandestinely, and operating with a stolen aircraft. Stolen? Kessler scoffed. A pilot of this caliber stealing a Messerschmitt? Unheard of. Perhaps, Schmidt replied, his voice devoid of emotion. Or perhaps simply unconsidered. My team has begun cross-referencing all missing airframes, however minor the cause. And we are analyzing pilot reports for any consistency beyond the hysterical. He paused, letting his words sink in. We will find him, and when we do, we will make an example of him that eradicates this Black Baron myth from our forces forever. I require carte blanche, General, and access to every resource available. Kessler, still fuming, recognized the cold steel in Schmidt's proposal. Granted, Oberst. Eliminate this pest. Do whatever is necessary. Schmidt gave a curt nod. Ja, General. Whatever is necessary. Major Eleanor Thorne traced the faint, pixelated lines of an aerial photograph, her brow furrowed in concentration. The clamor of the London intelligence office, usually a dull roar, seemed amplified around her, yet she heard none of it. Her world had shrunk to the collection of decrypted German intercepts, pilot debriefings, and her own insistent intuition. Miss Thorne, still chasing ghosts? Squadron Leader Finch's voice was laced with his usual patronizing amusement. He walked past her desk, a stack of freshly decrypted documents in his hand. Those Black Baron fairy tales can wait. We have actual intelligence to process. Eleanor ignored him, her finger hovering over a specific line in a German soldier's panicked account from an earlier intercept.
Ein schwarzer Mann wie der Teufel selbst, aber kein Deutscher.
A black man like the devil himself, but not German. It was the detail that wouldn't let go, the jarring anomaly that shattered the comfortable narrative of a deranged German pilot or an improbable Allied saboteur. Finch, she began, without looking up. What if it's not a fairy tale? What if it's an impossibility that has become real? He stopped, sighing dramatically. Thorne, are you suggesting the Germans have a Negro pilot, flying one of their most advanced fighters, to attack their own convoys? The question dripped with incredulity and an undeniable undercurrent of racial prejudice, a dismissive sneer at the very notion. The pilot's race is irrelevant to the threat, Finch. but it is relevant to understanding who this individual might be, and more importantly, why he's doing this. She finally looked up, her gaze steady and unwavering. No German pilot of any background would be allowed to operate a stolen aircraft against their own forces, not to this extent. This is not a rogue element within the Luftwaffe. This is something else entirely. She pushed a sheaf of documents towards him. Look at the pattern, the targets, the sheer audacity, the specific type of Messerschmitt, and the complete lack of any radio communication. This isn't just skilled. This is a personal war. And the German High Command's reaction? Pure fury, not confusion. Finch picked up the reports, a flicker of professional curiosity warring with his ingrained skepticism. So, a phantom Negro pilot, operating a stolen German plane, flying solo behind enemy lines, striking at German targets for what reason? He scoffed again, but the conviction in his voice was thinner. Vengeance, Eleanor said quietly, or something equally powerful. But here's the kicker. She pointed to a minor detail in a recently decoded manifest. A shipment of highly specialized hydraulic fluid, specifically formulated for certain advanced Messerschmitt prototypes, reported stolen from a secure facility in northern France several weeks ago, precisely when the Black Baron sightings began to escalate. Finch's eyes narrowed, connecting the dots despite himself. That fluid was rare, almost unobtainable outside official channels. It was a physical link, concrete proof that this wasn't some generic ghost plane. He looked at Eleanor, a new respect dawning in his eyes, quickly masked by his usual guarded expression. Thorne, if you're right, this is unprecedented. It's also incredibly dangerous to even suggest such a thing. For us. Before Eleanor could respond, the teletype machine on a nearby desk began to clatter violently, spitting out a fresh intercept, its urgency unmistakable. A German patrol, a squadron of Junkers Ju-88 night fighters, had reported a visual on a single Messerschmitt, fitting the description of Der Schwarzbären, flying low over the abandoned quarry regions of rural France. Their final message, before their signal was abruptly cut. He's making for the coast crippled, but he's still firing. Eleanor gasped, looking from the teletype to Finch, a chilling realization dawning on her. The Phantom wasn't invincible. He was wounded. And now, thanks to the missing hydraulic fluid, she knew exactly why. Eli, the ghost, was bleeding out, making a desperate run for an impossible escape. And Schmidt, she knew with absolute certainty, would already be closing the trap. The impact had torn through Eli like a cannonball. He'd wrestled the controls, fighting the crippled Messerschmitt to earth, a ghost-white streak against the black fabric of a moonless night. His ribs screamed, a staccato symphony of agony, each breath a fresh betrayal. He lay for a moment, slumped against the cockpit's cold steel, the acrid scent of burnt oil and fear clogging his lungs. Crippled, Eleanor had thought. She was right. He was bleeding, his own hydraulic fluid, hot and viscous, seeping into the worn leather of his flight suit from a nasty shrapnel wound in his side. The radio crackled, a distant, guttural German voice. Schmidt, always Schmidt. He was closing in. Eli pushed the thought away, focusing on the immediate. He was down. He was alive. The plane, however, was in a worse state. The hydraulic lines to the starboard aileron were severed, a spiderweb of gleaming fluid across the wing root. And the landing gear, after a brutal belly flop landing in a farmer's field bordering a small German-occupied airfield, was a mangled mess. He needed a replacement, a specific, reinforced line, and fast. Time was a luxury he no longer possessed. Moving was agony, each shift a spike of white-hot pain. He shucked off his flight helmet, the night air a sharp bomb against his sweat-soaked face. His M3 submachine gun was slung across his back, its cold metal a reassuring weight. He dragged himself out of the wreckage, the twisted metal groaning in protest. He had deliberately chosen this secluded field, miles from the nearest village, yet strategically close to the small German supply airfield marked on his pilfered maps. His target, a Junkers Ju-88, common enough, robust enough, parts donor. The airfield was a dim glow in the distance, a scattering of yellow lights swallowed by the pervasive darkness. He moved slowly, deliberately, his training kicking in, overriding the primal urge to collapse. Each step was a measured calculation, conserving energy, minimizing sound. He crossed fields of stubble, skirted ancient hedgerows, the damp earth clinging to his boots. The cold seeped into his bones, but his wound burned, a counterpoint to the chill. He could hear the distant rumble of a generator, the muffled shouts of German sentries, the occasional bark of a dog. Too close, always too close. He reached the perimeter fence, a rusty tangle of barbed wire. Not insurmountable. He took a pair of wire cutters from his utility belt, the metal cold and precise in his gloved hands. Snip, snip, snip. The silence was his only ally, a fragile shield against discovery. He slipped through the gap, a phantom in the night, his shadow swallowed by the darkness. Inside, the airfield was a hive of muted activity. A handful of Ju-88s stood on the tarmac, their monstrous silhouettes stark against the lighter sky. One, parked near a half-open hangar, looked promising. Its engine cowling was off, revealing a glimpse of its inner workings. A mechanic's oversight or perhaps a temporary repair. Eli's luck such as it was held. He moved low, hugging the shadows of crates and fuel drums, his M3 ready. He could hear German voices now, closer, a boisterous laugh from a guard post. He reached the Ju-88, its metal skin cold beneath his touch. The hydraulic lines were thicker, sturdier than his Messerschmitts. Perfect. This would buy him time. Working swiftly, silently, Eli began to dismantle the necessary components. His fingers, usually so deft, trembled with the effort, his vision blurring with pain. He ignored it, focusing on the intricate dance of nuts and bolts. The rhythmic clink-clink of metal against metal seemed deafening in the stillness, each sound a potential death knell. He paused, listening. The wind. Only the wind. He found the line, severed it cleanly, and began the delicate process of extracting it. It felt impossibly heavy in his injured state. Suddenly, a whisper, like the rustle of dry leaves, broke the silence behind him. You move like a ghost, der Schwarzbaron. Eli spun, M3 snapping up, a blur of motion. Standing no more than 20 feet away, partially obscured by the tail fin of a Ju-88, was a woman. She was slender, dressed in dark, utilitarian clothing, her face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Her eyes, however, caught the faint light from the distant hangar, glinting with an unnerving intelligence. She held a suppressed Luger, its muzzle aimed directly at his chest. Sabine, she said, her voice low, steady, without a hint of fear. You're bleeding. Eli's grip on his M3 remained rock solid. Who are you? He demanded, his voice a gravelly whisper. Someone who has been watching you, Sabine replied, a hint of steel beneath the calm. Watching the Germans chase shadows. Watching a single pilot dismantle their air superiority one engagement at a time. And now watching that same pilot steal parts from under their noses, like a rat in the lard. She gestured with her free hand, a small, elegant movement. That's a critical part you're holding. A single-point failure for a Ju-88, and you're taking it for a Messerschmitt. A knowing smile, brief and unsettling, touched her lips. The rumors, it seems, are true. You fly German birds against them. What do you want? Eli gritted out, his side throbbing. He didn't have time for this. He needed to be gone. What I want, Baron, is for France to be free, Sabine said, her gaze unwavering. What I want is for you to stop being a nuisance and start being an asset. She lowered her Luger, but her stance remained alert. Dangerous. You are wounded. Your plane is crippled. Schmidt's hounds are baying at your heels. You cannot repair that Messerschmitt out in the open. Not with the entire Wehrmacht hunting for a ghost. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to an almost inaudible murmur. I can give you a safe place. A real hangar hidden deep in the Ardennes. Resources, parts, a network that can acquire anything you need. Even that unique hydraulic fluid. Her words hung in the cold night air, an intoxicating promise. In exchange, you stop playing lone wolf. Eli's gaze narrowed. What's the price? The price, Sabine said, stepping fully into the dim light, revealing a face etched with the harsh realities of war, yet unyielding in its resolve, is that you fly for us. You are a weapon unlike any other the Allies possess, far more flexible than a bombing raid, more precise than a commando strike. You see the targets. We give you the missions, specific German assets, not just the random dogfights you seem to enjoy. We want their supply lines crippled, their communication hubs silenced, their high-value targets eliminated. She paused, her eyes piercing. And we want you to make an example of a certain SS Gruppenführer's personal transport next week. He's been particularly cruel in the Loire Valley. Eli considered her, his mind racing. This was a trap, a dangerous bargain. He would be trading one kind of hunted existence for another, becoming a pawn in a game he hadn't chosen. But the offer of a hidden hangar of resources was a siren song. He was out of options, bleeding out in occupied territory with an unrepairable plane and a tightening noose around his neck. This was desperation meeting opportunity. If I do this, Eli said, if I become your asset, what happens if I refuse a mission? Sabine's lips curled into that unsettling, almost predatory smile again. Then, Baron, you are just another downed pilot, and we wouldn't be able to help you when Schmidt inevitably finds you. Her gaze was clear, cold. This is not a suggestion. It is an alliance born of necessity. You have a unique skill set. We have the intelligence and the infrastructure. Together, we can make them bleed. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, echoing the tumultuous storm brewing within Eli. He looked at the hydraulic line in his hand, then back at Sabine. He knew he had just traded his solitary vengeance for a tangled web of obligations. He was no longer just the Black Baron, a phantom of the skies. He was now a tethered ghost, bound to a woman who saw him only as a tool. A dangerous tool, yes, but a tool nonetheless. All right, Eli rasped, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Show me the way. Sabine nodded, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. Good. We start with your plane. And then, she said, her voice hardening, we give the Gestapo a night they will never forget. Their regional headquarters in Lyon has just received a new shipment of interrogation equipment. It would be a shame if it went missing. Eli felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He had walked into something far bigger, far darker, than he could have imagined. His escape had just become a deeper descent. Oberst Schmidt stared at the illuminated map in his war room, a tableau of pinpricks and red lines tracing the ghost of an adversary. For weeks, the enigma of the Black Baron had gnawed at him, a splinter under the nail of his meticulous command. The attacks were surgical, devastating, and infuriatingly untraceable. But Schmidt was a man who believed in patterns, in the invisible geometry of chaos. He was a scientist of war, dissecting destruction for its hidden logic. He had personally overseen the collation of every scrap of intelligence. Wreckage fragments, eyewitness accounts, often terrified, contradictory meteorological reports for each attack night, even the precise angle of moonlight. Most commanders dismissed the Baron as a random terror, a rogue element, a mere act of insurgency. Schmidt saw something else, a cold, precise intellect behind the mask of vengeance. Sir, his aide, Lieutenant Gruber, ventured, hovering at a respectful distance. We've analyzed the wingtip damage from the transport attack near Clermont. The impact trajectory suggests a highly unusual maneuver. Almost impossible. Schmidt didn't look up. His finger, calloused from years of gripping strategy, traced a line on the map. Impossible is merely a word for what has not yet been understood. Lieutenant, the Baron isn't impossible. He is unconventional. He tapped a cluster of red pins. Look at the timing. Always late night, near new moon. Always attacking logistical hubs or high-value targets. And the escape vectors always towards the same quadrant. His finger swept across a mountainous, heavily forested region known for its numerous isolated valleys and abandoned mines. A zone considered too challenging for sustained aerial operations. He's using the terrain as cover. He's not randomly striking and fleeing. He has a lair, a sophisticated one. Schmidt's eyes glinted with the fierce satisfaction of a puzzle piece slotting into place. He is not a ghost, gentlemen. He is a predator with a very specific hunting ground. This deduction, reached through painstaking, almost obsessive analysis, was met with skepticism in some quarters. To suggest an enemy pilot could operate with such precision and audacity, virtually unmolested for weeks, implied a systemic failure within the Luftwaffe itself. It was a narrative Schmidt refused to tolerate. But he had the Führer's direct mandate to eliminate this threat, and his methods, however unorthodox, yielded results. He knew he needed someone equally unconventional to catch the Baron, someone who understood the art of the hunt. That someone was Hauptmann Klaus Richter. Richter stood before Schmidt's desk, an impeccably uniformed man with eyes that missed nothing. He was a veteran of the Eastern Front, where he'd earned his laurels hunting Soviet night bombers, a game of deadly hide and seek in the freezing darkness. There was a lean, predatory stillness about him that Schmidt appreciated. He smelled of ozone and oil, not cologne. Hauptmann, Schmidt began, without preamble, the Luftwaffe has failed to eliminate this Black Baron. Your unit, I believe, is uniquely suited to correct this oversight. Richter nodded, a flicker of disdain in his eyes, not for Schmidt, but for the elusive Baron. A single rogue pilot? Oberst? With respect, my pilots are accustomed to squadrons, not lone wolves. This lone wolf has destroyed more material in the last month than some of your squadrons combined. Schmidt retorted, his voice sharp, brooking no argument. He operates a modified Messerschmitt pre-war model, with unheard of endurance and a penchant for impossible acrobatics. He flies exclusively at night, often below radar, using terrain to mask his approach. He is a phantom, Hauptmann, and he is yours to hunt. Schmidt laid out his findings. The predicted operational area, the flight patterns, the psychological profile he'd painstakingly constructed. A man driven by extreme skill and boundless hatred. Richter listened, his initial skepticism slowly giving way to a professional intrigue. He saw the challenge, the intellectual sparring match Schmidt was proposing. He's good, Richter finally conceded, picking up a photograph of charred wreckage, his finger tracing a pattern of impact. Too good for a simple rogue. Precisely, Schmidt said, a faint smile playing on his lips, a flicker of shared understanding. That is why I give you my most advanced radar equipment, my most experienced night pilots, and my complete authority. Find him, Hauptmann. Bring me the Black Baron. Richter returned to his own command tent, not to rest, but to work. He spread out maps, detailed intelligence reports, and reconstructed flight paths across his campaign table. He studied every single recorded engagement, every near miss, every successful kill attributed to the Baron. He mentally flew each mission from the Baron's cockpit, trying to anticipate his moves, to understand the mind behind the joystick. The Baron was an artist of the night, a master of deception and evasion. Richter began to see not a demon, but a formidable opponent whose craft demanded a grudging, almost academic respect. This man was not just lucky, he was brilliant. This could be a career-defining hunt, Richter thought, a thrill, cold and professional, running through him. To best such an opponent would elevate him, elevate his unit, perhaps even elevate his own understanding of aerial combat. Eli felt it first as a prickle on the back of his neck, a subtle shift in the nocturnal atmosphere, a tightening of the air. He was returning from another successful, if morally murky, mission for Sabine, a daring raid on a German supply convoy deep within occupied territory, orchestrated with chilling precision by the French resistance. The euphoria of the kill was fleeting, replaced by an unsettling intuition. He was no longer just hunting, he was being hunted in turn. His radar, primitive but effective for avoiding most patrol routes, had started showing fleeting blips, faint and then gone, like ghosts in the ether. He'd dismissed them at first as atmospheric interference or ground-based patrols. But the frequency, the sheer persistence, became undeniable. A cold certainty settled in his stomach. They were closer. Then came the first near-miss. He was skimming a forested ridgeline, banking hard to take advantage of the dense cover, when his cockpit filled with the blinding glare of a searchlight. The beam, thicker and more focused than anything he'd encountered before, locked onto his plane with terrifying precision. A moment later, tracers erupted from the darkness ahead, stitching a line of fiery death just above his canopy. Eli swore, yanking the stick back, the Messerschmitt screaming in protest as he pulled a desperate Immelmann turn. He saw the silhouetted shape of a Bf-110, a twin-engine night fighter, peel away from the attack, its own engine thundering. It wasn't just patrolling, it was waiting. Clever bastards, Eli muttered, his heart hammering against his ribs. They knew his approximate altitude, his preferred terrain. This wasn't random. This was a dedicated hunt, spearheaded by someone who understood his game. Over the next few nights, the encounters escalated. He found himself dodging not one, but sometimes 2 or 3 Bf-110s, their advanced radar systems painting his position with alarming regularity. He was forced to fly lower, riskier, hugging the contours of the earth, using every trick he knew. Sudden dives into valleys, feints towards mountain peaks before dropping into unexpected ravines, even briefly cutting his engine to glide silent and unseen through radar shadows. He felt like a rat in a maze, the walls closing in. Once, returning from a mission targeting a troop train, Eli found himself boxed in, radar locks from 3 separate directions converging. He could hear the crackle of German comms in his headset, their pilots calling out his position, their voices cold and precise. He saw the tracer fire from a distance, calculating his intercept. In a moment of desperate inspiration, he plunged his plane into a thick, swirling cloud bank that clung to a high peak, knowing it was an immense risk, a blind dive into uncertain terrain, a gamble with jagged rock and unseen updrafts. He felt the terrifying buffet of nearstalls, the sudden drops that made his stomach lurch, but he kept going, relying on instinct and the sheer audacity of the move. When he emerged, shaken but free, the sky behind him was empty. Richter, reviewing the engagement logs, felt a surge of reluctant admiration. He went into the cloud? Blind. He shook his head, a wry smile touching his lips. Only a madman or a genius would attempt that. He knows the mountains better than our own cartographers. His respect for the Baron was no longer grudging. It was a profound acknowledgement of a peer, albeit a deadly enemy. This wasn't just a mission anymore. It was a personal duel, a contest of wills and aerial prowess. Richter felt it in his gut, a growing obsession. He had to meet this man in the air. Eli, back at Sabine's hidden airfield, felt the exhaustion seep into his bones, deeper than before. He ran his hand over the chipped paint on his wing, a fresh bullet graze. They were getting closer. He knew it in his gut. The hunters were more sophisticated, more relentless. He was no longer a phantom. He was a quarry, and the scent of his fear, however faint, was in the air. He stared out into the oppressive darkness, the thought chilling him to the bone. They were learning his rhythm, his tells. He had used every trick, pushed every limit. He knew, with a terrifying certainty, that his next move would have to be something truly unthinkable. He was out of conventional evasions. His solitary hunt had become a desperate struggle for survival, and the net was drawing tighter, strand by invisible strand. And somewhere above, a new patrol began, Richter himself at the controls of the lead BF-110. His eyes scanning the moonless sky, searching for the telltale flicker of a single, defiant shadow. He had studied the Baron, understood him. He felt a strange kinship with this man he hunted, a shared understanding of the silent, deadly ballet of aerial combat. And tonight he felt it in his bones. The Baron would fly, and tonight Richter intended to be waiting. The amber glow of the desk lamp did little to warm Major Eleanor Thorne's stark office in London. Outside, the city hummed with the muted thrum of wartime vigilance, a constant reminder of the stakes. Inside, Eleanor traced the familiar lines of a German supply route scrawled across her map, a route recently, inexplicably, ravaged. Not by conventional air raids, nor by known resistance actions, but by the precise surgical strikes that had become the chilling signature of the Black Baron. She picked up a dog-eared folder. Operation Nightshade, the official designation for the Enigma. Her superiors, still skeptical, dismissed the Baron as either an exaggerated myth or a coincidental series of unrelated incidents. But Eleanor knew better. She had seen the patterns, cross-referenced the flight paths, studied the damage reports. This wasn't coincidence. This was design, and it was undeniably effective. A dangerous, exhilarating thought had begun to bloom in her strategic mind. What if the Baron wasn't just a rogue element, but a force that could be guided? Not controlled, no, that was a fool's errand, but subtly, intelligently channeled. The ethics of it pricked at her, a cold tendril of doubt, but the war, relentless and brutal, had a way of blunting such concerns. Lives were being lost by the thousand. If an unregistered asset, however morally ambiguous, could turn the tide even infinitesimally, was it not her duty to consider it? She pulled a fresh map towards her, marking a section of rail line in northern France, known to carry critical German munitions, but deemed too heavily defended for a conventional strike. Her finger hovered, then moved to a less obvious, but equally vulnerable junction further south. One that fit the Baron's established operational radius. A whisper in the right ear, she mused, a carefully placed suggestion. Later that week, a cryptic message passed through the clandestine channels of the French resistance, ostensibly from a disaffected railway worker in Calais, detailing a rumored shipment of high-value fuel moving along that southern route. The intel was just vague enough to be plausible, just specific enough to be acted upon by an individual with particular instincts. Eleanor didn't expect the resistance to launch a full-scale assault. She expected him to find it. And 3 nights later, the intel was vindicated by the familiar, damning silence from that section of the rail network. A vital artery severed. Another ghost strike. Eleanor felt a chill, a thrill, and a profound disquiet. She had fed the wolf and it had hunted. Hundreds of miles away, in the damp, subterranean nerve center Eli had carved out beneath Sabine's barn. The air hung heavy with the scent of ozone and stale coffee. His fingers, calloused from throttle and joystick, now danced across the keys of a captured Enigma machine, its mechanical clicks a morbid lullaby. Days bled into nights, the relentless decoding a desperate attempt to stay one step ahead, to find the next weakness, the next target. His mind, perpetually wired, filtered through the static of encrypted German communications, searching for the telltale shimmer of something truly significant. The last few weeks had been a blur of increasingly close calls. Richter, he knew, was not just hunting him, he was studying him. The Luftwaffe's pursuit patterns were evolving, adapting to his evasions. The thrill of the chase was gone, replaced by a grim, bone-deep weariness. He was no longer the phantom. He was the fox, and the hounds were closing in, their baying growing louder, even if only in the periphery of his overstimulated senses. Then a flicker, a sequence of letters and numbers that didn't align with troop movements or supply convoys. A series of references, coded within a secure transmission between a high-ranking SS officer and an obscure research division, that spoke of Project Phoenix, Reich's ultimate weapon, and Peenemund's northern reach. Eli felt a jolt of ice-cold dread. Peenemund. The name was whispered with fear and awe across Allied intelligence. It was where the Germans were developing their long-range rockets. But northern reach? He cross-referenced the coordinates, his breath catching in his throat. Not the main facility, but a satellite site, deep within occupied territory, one that had escaped detection. The details that followed, once painstakingly decrypted, painted a horrifying picture. A secret V-2 rocket research facility, almost operational, poised to unleash devastation on London, on Paris, on innocent civilians. A game-changer in the most terrifying sense. He stared at the decoded text, the stark truth of it burning itself into his vision. This wasn't just another target for the Baron. This was intelligence of monumental importance, a strategic threat that transcended his personal war. He couldn't just bomb it. The Allies needed to know, to plan. But how? He was a ghost, a myth. He had no official channels. To contact the resistance directly was to expose his existence, to shatter the impenetrable veil he had so carefully woven around himself. It was suicide. Yet the alternative was unthinkable. London burning, civilian lives extinguished by a weapon he knew existed, a weapon he had the means to warn about. The image of his sister, her bright, defiant eyes, flashed in his mind. No, he wouldn't stand by. He would take the risk. It was the unthinkable move he anticipated, the one born of desperation. His plan, born of his unique position, was audacious to the point of madness. He would make a single, irrefutable intel drop. Not just a message, but physical evidence, packaged with precision. He spent the next day poring over maps, identifying a dead drop point known to Resistance Cell Cadet, a crumbling church ruin on the outskirts of Chartres, regularly used for less sensitive exchanges. His contact within Cadet, a quiet woman named Genevieve, was a risk, but a necessary one. That night, under a sky choked with heavy cloud, Eli flew a different mission. His aircraft, stripped of all but essential combat gear, carried a small, weighted package tucked securely into a specially modified compartment. He flew low, hugging the terrain, avoiding all known patrol routes, his senses screaming with every rustle of wind, every phantom flicker on the horizon. He was no longer hunting, he was delivering. The church ruin appeared out of the gloom, a skeletal finger against the blackness. He circled once, his heart hammering against his ribs, scanning for any sign of German patrols, any flicker of an ambush. Nothing. He descended, lower than he had ever dared, the roar of his engine a blasphemy in the quiet night. With practiced precision, he opened the compartment, released the package, and watched it fall, a dark silhouette against the paler earth. Then he gunned the engine, banking sharply, disappearing back into the comforting embrace of the clouds. Less than an hour later, Genevieve, shivering in the damp night air, retrieved the package. Inside, protected by layers of oilcloth, were meticulously hand-drawn schematics, photographs taken from reconnaissance flights Eli had daringly performed himself, and a partial decryption of the German communique, enough to scream V2 facility to anyone with strategic insight. There was no sender's name, no call sign, only a single, crudely drawn Black Baron chess piece. The package reached Eleanor Thorne's desk by courier the following morning, passed through the layers of the resistance network with astonishing speed. She unwrapped it, her initial curiosity turning to a gasp of sharp, visceral fear as she recognized the schematics. Her eyes scanned the partial decryption, the coordinates, the implications. V2, a new facility, operational. The cold knot in her stomach tightened. This was a nightmare. This was real. Her mind raced, connecting the dots. The timing, the sheer depth of the intelligence. It wasn't standard resistance fare. It was too precise, too technical, too complete. And then the Black Baron chess piece. A shiver ran down her spine. The whisper she had sent, the wolf she had fed, had returned with a feast. She knew, with chilling clarity, that this intelligence had come from him, from the Black Baron. A moral precipice opened before her. Her duty was clear. Report this immediately, along with its extraordinary source. Unmask the Baron as a pilot of undeniable skill, but also as a dangerous, uncontrollable entity operating beyond Allied command. Bring him in. But if she did, she knew what would happen. They would try to control him, to bring him into the fold. He would resist. He would be captured or worse, killed. And the invaluable, untraceable intelligence source, the tactical advantage he represented, would be lost forever. She stared at the chess piece, its stark black silhouette a mirror to the choices twisting in her mind. The intelligence was paramount. The war demanded ruthlessness. If he could be subtly nudged, used to gather such critical data, to disrupt German operations with such surgical precision, then his anonymity, his very existence as a myth, was a weapon in itself. Her jaw tightened. The rules of engagement had long ago blurred in this war. She would not report the source. She would present the intelligence as an anonymous, fortunate intercept from an unidentifiable resistance network. She would take credit for vetting it, for bringing it to light, and she would create a new, deeply clandestine operation, one where she and she alone understood the true nature of their most potent, most dangerous, and most utterly deniable asset, the Black Baron. A cold resolve settled over her. She would protect his secret. She would exploit his legend. She would become the unseen hand, guiding the wolf from the shadows, ensuring that the Allies harnessed his destructive power, even if it meant sacrificing her own soul in the process. She pushed the intel across her desk, a grim satisfaction mingled with a profound sense of isolation. The war had just become far more complicated and far more perilous for everyone involved, especially for her. The stale scent of damp earth and fear clung to the package, a sickly perfume Eli had come to recognize as the harbinger of bad news. He knelt in the shadow of a crumbling barn, fingers nimble and cold, retrieving the canvas pouch from its hollow in the ancient stone wall. This wasn't the usual drop, precise and methodical. This was hurried, almost desperate. Inside, beneath a layer of straw, was a single sheet of paper folded roughly. Sabine's familiar, elegant script was reduced to a frantic scrawl. Eli, compromised. LeBlanc taken near Montaigne. Interrogated. They spoke of a black plane and a ghost operative. Nothing more, but Schmidt is closing in. You must abandon your position. Now, the network is scrambling. I'll send new coordinates if I can. A chill, not from the biting autumn air, settled deep in Eli's bones. LeBlanc. He remembered the man, a quiet baker, meticulous in his reports, a stoic face that rarely betrayed emotion. To imagine Schmidt's men on him, Eli squeezed his eyes shut for a fleeting moment, the image a visceral punch to the gut. LeBlanc wouldn't talk easily, but the Gestapo had ways that broke saints. Black plane, and Ghost Operative, too close for comfort. They knew just enough to narrow their search, to breathe down his neck. The immediate imperative was clear. He had maybe hours at best. His current hideout, a deserted forester's cabin nestled deep in the Ardennes, was compromised. Its remote location had been its strength. Now it was its most dangerous vulnerability. Every movement he made, every piece of intel he extracted, had ripple effects, and now those ripples were turning into a destructive tide. He was a stone dropped into a calm pond, and the splash threatened to drown everyone around him. With practiced efficiency, Eli moved. Maps were burned, codes memorized then destroyed, radio components disassembled and scattered across different caches, each too small to be useful on its own. The cabin, a sanctuary for weeks, became a sterile shell once more. He stripped it of any trace of his presence, leaving behind only the lingering scent of wood smoke and a profound sense of loss. He carried only what was essential. His silenced Luger, a handful of high-explosive charges, and a satchel of false papers and emergency rations. As he packed, his mind raced, a whirlwind of calculated risks and potential escape routes. Sabine's network, already stretched thin, would be further exposed by his sudden dislocation. Safe houses would need to be changed, new contact points established, and the steady flow of vital intelligence would stutter, perhaps even cease for a time. The war didn't pause for personal inconvenience, and the Allies were waiting for his reports, blind without his eyes and ears on the ground. The Baron, the myth, was a burden as much as a weapon. Just as he was about to seal his emergency pack, his fingers brushed against another folded scrap of paper, tucked deep within the initial package Sabine had left. It was smaller, less urgent in its placement, almost an afterthought. He pulled it out, frowning. It wasn't Sabine's precise hand. The lines were jagged, hesitant, almost childlike. It was a crude, undeniable drawing. The silhouette of a fighter plane, wings swept back, beneath it a small, distinct lightning bolt insignia, the emblem of the Tuskegee Airman. Eli's breath hitched. His world, which had just shrunk to the immediate dangers of the forest, suddenly expanded, ripped open. Below the drawing, scrawled in an uncertain hand, was a name, Lieutenant M. Jones. And beneath that, a string of seemingly random numbers and letters, POWKP. Stalag Luft 3. His vision blurred. Marcus Mac Jones. His wingman. His friend. The man he'd last seen plummeting in a plume of black smoke. His P-51. The red tail angel, spiraling towards the earth, a flaming arrow pointing to the inevitable. Eli had carried the weight of that loss for months, a silent shroud over his soul, the guilt of survival a constant companion. To know that Mac might be alive, captured. A violent tremor ran through him. It was as if a ghost had reached out from the depths of his memory and seized him by the throat. Mac wasn't just another Allied soldier. He was family. A brother forged in the crucible of prejudice and war. Two dark-skinned men flying against a world that doubted their very right to exist, let alone fight for it. Mac was the laughter in the barracks, the steady hand on the stick, the unwavering belief that they could change the world, one dogfight at a time. Eli stared at the scrap of paper, his heart hammering against his ribs. The strategic withdrawal, the need for anonymity, the mission itself, all of it suddenly seemed distant, muted by the raw, visceral shock of Mac's name. Stalag Luft 3, a notorious camp, a death trap for many. This wasn't just about the Black Baron anymore. It was about Eli Vance, the man, the pilot, the brother. The ghost had a past, a history, a beating heart that refused to stay silent. The risks of diverting his attention, of exposing himself further for one man, were astronomical. It could unravel everything, compromise the entire Allied intelligence effort in this sector. But the thought of leaving Mac to languish, perhaps to die, knowing he was so close it was a poison in his veins. His gaze flickered from the drawing to a detailed map of the region, spread open on the rough-hewn table. His finger traced a line, from his current, soon-to-be-abandoned position, across dense forests and winding rivers, to a specific point marked by a tiny, ominous red circle, Stalag Luft 3. A decision, cold and resolute, formed in the chaotic storm of his mind. The mission had just become infinitely more complicated, and far more personal. He would not leave his brother behind. The air hummed with a different kind of electricity tonight, not just the nervous energy of a pilot about to face oblivion, but the raw, visceral charge of a debt to be paid. Eli Vance, strapped into the cockpit of the Midnight Rider, felt the familiar thrum of the Merlin engine beneath him, a powerful heartbeat echoing his own. Tonight, it wasn't just about disrupting the Nazi war machine. It was about brotherhood, about a name scrawled on a dirty scrap of paper, Mac. He'd spent the last 24 hours meticulously plotting. Intelligence from a desperate, brave resistance cell had confirmed the target. A priority German supply train, laden with vital V-2 rocket components, snaking its way through the dense forests of the Harz Mountains. Its path was predictable, its vulnerability undeniable. A single-track choke point over the frozen Aller River, flanked by steep, forested banks. Perfect ambush point, and for Eli a perfect diversion. His gaze swept over the instrument panel, then out into the moonless night. He knew Schmidt would anticipate a move. The Baron had been too quiet, too long. The trap would be elaborate, deadly. But Eli had chosen this choke point not just for the train, but for its proximity to Stalag Luft 3. The explosions, the chaos, the distraction he intended to unleash. It would be a fleeting window, but perhaps enough for men like Mac to slip through the net. Miles away, in a dimly lit bunker, Oberst Schmidt tapped a manicured finger on a map. "He will come," he murmured, his voice a low growl. "He cannot resist such a target, and he cannot resist the lure of a trap set specifically for him." Hauptmann Richter, sleek and predatory in his night fighter uniform, merely nodded, his eyes glinting with a cold, professional hunger. "My squadron is ready, Oberst. Every pilot is briefed, every approach covered. The skies over the Aller are a steel cage tonight." "Good," Schmidt replied, a wolfish smile stretching his thin lips. "Tonight, der Schwarzbaron will finally fall. And then, Herr Richter, we will know his secrets." Eli nosed the Midnight Rider down, descending into the cold embrace of the lower air. Below, the forest canopy was a vast, inky blanket, broken only by the silver serpentine gleam of the frozen river. And there it was, a faint, flickering light in the distance, growing steadier, stronger, the headlamp of the train. A long, dark caterpillar, crawling confidently towards its doom. He pushed the throttle forward. The P-51 screamed through the night, a black arrow loosed from a bow. Anti-aircraft batteries, hidden amongst the trees flanking the choke point, would be dormant now, waiting for the trap to spring. Eli wouldn't wait. His first pass was a brutal, shocking act of violence. The P-51's 6.50 caliber machine guns spat fire, tracer rounds stitching a fiery line down the length of the train. Explosions rippled through the carriages, fuel tanks, ammunition, the volatile V-2 components. Secondary blasts erupted, blossoming into orange and red fireballs that tore through the night, illuminating the dense forest in grotesque, flickering shadows. Then came the answering fire. Flak guns, previously silent, roared to life, tracers rising like angry, luminous wasps, converging on Eli's position. The choke point was no longer dark. It was a cauldron of fire and thunder. Scree! The radar warning blared in his ears. Not flak. Fighters. Richter's cage. From the swirling darkness above and around him, the sleek silhouettes of Messerschmitt Bf 110 night fighters materialized, their exhaust flames glowing like malevolent eyes. Hauptmann Richter, at the head of the formation, pressed his attack, his voice crackling through Eli's comms, distorted but clear. "This is Hauptmann Richter to the Black Baron. Your game ends tonight." Eli didn't respond. He didn't have time. He slammed the stick over, pulling into a gut-wrenching turn, dodging a stream of cannon fire that ripped through the air where he'd been moments before. The train below was a roaring inferno now, the bridge beginning to buckle and groan under the concentrated fury. His first objective was achieved. Now for the second. The dogfight was a blur of G-forces, instinct, and raw skill. Eli danced through the flak and the Messerschmitts, his black Mustang a ghost in the pyrotechnic display. He wasn't just fighting. He was performing an aerial ballet of defiance. He took hits, one to the starboard wing, another tearing a chunk from his fuselage, the P-51 shuddering violently, protesting the abuse. Warning lights flared on his dash, a chorus of imminent failure. But Eli pushed through the pain, the fear, the adrenaline. He saw Richter's lead plane, silhouetted against a blossoming explosion from the train wreckage. Personal. This was personal. He locked on, unleashing a furious burst. Richter, an ace in his own right, reacted instantly, pulling his Bf-110 into a steep climb. But it wasn't enough. Eli's tracers found their mark, ripping into the Messerschmitt's starboard engine. A geyser of flame erupted, and the plane lurched, spiraling out of formation, trailing smoke and fire. "Richter, you're hit!" A panicked voice screamed over the German comms. Eli didn't wait to confirm the kill. He was a phantom, disappearing into the chaotic mess he had created. Below, the Aller Bridge groaned its last, collapsing into the fiery wreckage, sending a plume of scalding steam and shrapnel into the night. The V-2 components, the meticulously guarded train, everything was annihilated. The explosions rumbled for miles, shaking the very earth. At Stalag Luft 3, a few miles distant, lights flickered, generators stuttered, and the distant shouts of guards were drowned out by the thunder. In the chaos, a small, dark figure, moving with the practiced stealth of a man who had planned this for weeks, slipped past a momentarily disoriented guard tower. Mac. He hadn't just used the diversion. He'd been ready for it. Others followed, a stream of shadows escaping into the night. Meanwhile, Richter's crippled Bf-110 plummeted, the cockpit filling with smoke. He fought for control, his face grim, sweat mingling with soot. Through the shattered canopy, he caught a final, desperate glimpse of the black plane, damaged but pulling away. It was close enough, for a fraction of a second, in the searing glare of the train's demise, to make out the pilot's profile. The Black Baron. A man. Not a monster, not a legend, but a man. His skin, illuminated starkly by the inferno below, was not white. It was dark, a deep, unmistakable ebony. Richter's eyes, wide with disbelief and horror, reflected the fiery scene. "Derivative der Schwarz Baron," he choked, a gurgling sound escaping his lips as his plane entered its final, uncontrolled dive. The realization hit him, a shocking, blasphemous truth that tore through his rigid, racist worldview.
Ein Neger.
His last breath was a silent scream of utter, complete incredulity, as the ground rushed up to meet him. Eli, his P-51 groaning and shuddering, limped away from the inferno, barely maintaining altitude. Smoke streamed from his wing, and the engine coughed, threatening to seize. He was wounded, bleeding, his mission accomplished at a devastating cost. He didn't know if Mac was free, if his daring gamble had paid off. All he knew was the cold, biting wind whipping through the hole in his fuselage, and the dark, indifferent expanse of the sky. He was alone, crippled, deep behind enemy lines, and his plane was dying. The world was a blur of pain and cold metal. Eli fought the dizzying spiral of exhaustion and blood loss, his hands locked onto the vibrating stick. The P-51, once a screaming demon of the skies, was now a mortally wounded beast, gasping for breath. Smoke billowed from the starboard wing, a dark, oily plume against the bruised dawn sky, and the engine coughed, a wet, rattling protest that sent shivers down his spine. Below, the German countryside was a patchwork quilt of snow-dusted fields and dark forests, indifferent to his plight. He was flying on instinct, on a prayer, and a raw, stubborn refusal to die. His vision swam, a kaleidoscope of reds and grays from the wound in his shoulder and the throbbing ache in his head. "Mac, did you make it?" The question was a burning coal in his chest, a counterpoint to the physical agony. He'd seen the train explode, the inferno blossoming, a brutal, beautiful flower of destruction. He'd hoped, he'd prayed. His altimeter needle flickered precariously. The plane was losing altitude, steadily, relentlessly. He scanned the horizon, searching for the prearranged coordinates, a tiny, concealed clearing in the heart of the Schwarzwald. It was a needle in a haystack, a desperate gamble by resistance contacts he'd never met, based on intelligence whispered across enemy lines. Then a flicker, a pinprick of orange against the encroaching darkness of a dense pine forest. Not one, but three quickly extinguished. A signal. Relief, sharp and sudden, almost buckled his knees. He wrestled the P-51 into a ragged descent, the wind whistling through the gaping hole in the fuselage like a banshee. Tree branches scraped against the belly of the plane, a terrifying symphony of tearing metal and snapping wood. He braced for impact, teeth gritted, every muscle screaming. The landing was less a controlled descent and more a controlled crash. The plane skidded across the snow-covered clearing, ripping through saplings, before grinding to a halt with a final, groaning sigh. Silence. An absolute, deafening silence broken only by the drip of fuel and the frantic beating of his own heart. He tried to move, to unstrap himself, but his body refused, pinned by fatigue and the cold vice of fear. Then movement in the trees, shadows detaching themselves from the gloom, figures, and one, unmistakable, limping towards him, a rifle clutched in his hand. Mac. Eli, you magnificent bastard! Mac's voice was hoarse, choked with emotion, as he yanked open the canopy. His face, streaked with dirt and grime, was a mask of disbelief and profound relief. I thought you were gone. Eli managed a weak smile, the effort sending fresh waves of pain through him. Took you long enough, Sergeant. Mac and two other resistance fighters carefully helped him out of the cockpit, his injured leg protesting with every movement. As they laid him gently on a makeshift stretcher, Eli saw them, a dozen or so men, gaunt and weary but alive. The escaped POWs, a success. The cost, however, was etched on their faces, and on his own battered body. Thousands of miles away, in a dimly lit office in London, Major Thorne meticulously reread the fragments of intelligence. The V-2 train, codenamed Thor's Hammer, confirmed destroyed. The POW camp, a ghost town, intercepted German communications, riddled with panic and confusion, spoke of an unidentified black aircraft, of daring raids, of a shadow pilot. Richter, a decorated pilot, was listed as MIA. His final radio message a garbled, frantic utterance about Der Schwarzbären. Thorne leaned back, exhaling a slow plume of cigarette smoke. The pieces clicked into place with chilling precision. Eli had not only located the V-2 train but had orchestrated the escape of Mac and his men. He had done it all alone against impossible odds. The sheer audacity, the unparalleled success was breathtaking. But it was also a problem, a monumental, intractable problem. An African-American pilot, operating with such lethal effectiveness, deep behind enemy lines, was a narrative too complex, too controversial, for the current Allied agenda. The war was about unified fronts, about clear-cut heroes. The truth of Eli's identity, a man fighting not just the Germans but the systemic prejudices of his own nation, would unravel carefully constructed propaganda. It would provoke inconvenient questions, disrupt crucial alliances, and expose the uncomfortable realities of their own racial segregation. No, Eli was too dangerous to be a hero, too valuable to be lost. She stubbed out her cigarette with a decisive twist. Censor all related reports, she instructed her aide, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. Any mention of an unidentified black aircraft is to be dismissed as enemy propaganda or pilot error. Richter's fate, combat casualty, exact circumstances unknown. And the pilot, Major? The aide ventured, a hint of trepidation in his voice. Thorne stared out the window, at the gray London sky, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in her hand. The pilot, she said, her voice now barely a whisper, does not exist, not officially. He is merely a legend. A terrifying, unconfirmed legend for the Germans, Der Schwarzbären. A ghost in the skies, a whisper of dread that stole their sleep. And for a select few within the Allied intelligence, a quiet source of awe, a testament to silent, unacknowledged heroism. His legend would serve them far better than his truth ever could. Days later, Eli sat wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, his wounds bandaged, a mug of bitter ersatz coffee warming his hands. Mac sat opposite him in the rustic forest cabin, his face grave. The resistance leader, Klaus, he says they can get you back to Allied lines, Mac said, his eyes searching Eli's. They have a route, dangerous but possible. You'd be hailed a hero, Eli. Imagine, a black pilot, pulling off a mission like this. Eli looked into the flickering fire, the flames dancing in his dark eyes. A hero. He thought of the stares, the whispers, the segregated mess halls, the constant battle for respect and recognition even within the uniform. He thought of Captain Thorne, her cold, calculating eyes, and the likely political quagmire his return would create. He was too dark, too good, too other. A hero? Eli repeated, the word tasting like ash. Or a problem? Max stiffened, understanding dawning in his eyes. He knew. He'd seen the subtle barriers, the unspoken rules that governed Eli's life. You'd be debriefed, celebrated, then probably shunted off to some desk job, away from the front lines, away from where you could actually make a difference. Eli continued, his voice low, steady. And every step of the way, I'd be fighting them, not the Germans, but the invisible walls built by my own side. He looked at Mac, a quiet resolve hardening his features. This war isn't over, Mac. Not for me. There are still planes to be shot down, trains to be sabotaged, men to be freed. He gestured to the surrounding forest, to the hidden network of resistance. Here, my skin color doesn't matter. Only my skill, my resolve. Mac slowly nodded, a flicker of pain and respect in his gaze. So, you're going to stay? I'm going to disappear, Eli corrected, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. The world needs its legends, Mac, but the fight needs its ghosts. He lifted his mug, a silent toast to the unwritten legacy he was choosing. He would be the Black Baron, a phantom of the war-torn skies, striking fear into the heart of the Reich. His true identity a secret held only by the wind, the snow, and a select few who truly understood the untold sacrifices of war, the ones not etched in monuments, but forged in the shadows, by those who chose to fight for a freedom they themselves were denied. He would be a whisper, a terrifying rumor, a beacon for a clandestine war, forever flying, forever unseen.